Hello and welcome to the GameDay Podcast from talkSPORT with me, Sam Matterface, the assistant editor of The Mirror, Darren Lewis, and talkSPORT's European football man, Kevin Hatchard, as Everton drop into dangerous territory. Despite the defeat, Frank's fighters showed a bit of heart, but Burnley beating Wolves has not helped their cause. The nervy relegation run-in just got a whole lot more alarming. Ring that bell. Chelsea will surely now finish in third, but they needed a little bit of help from a superhero after Jorginho's jig. United, in name only, Arsenal, a real team, and Newcastle absolutely smashing it. Rubbish VAR calls, brilliant subs, a title race to behold, and Jesus turns Watford into whiners. It's all on the best Premier League review of the weekend. It's the GameDay Podcast from talkSPORT. Hello to Kevin Hatchard and Darren Lewis, who join us on the first ever visual podcast from talkSPORT. If you are a regular listener downloading the GameDay Podcast, thank you very much for doing so. But you might now want to check us out on YouTube. The talkSPORT YouTube channel has an array of varying different programs, but we are on there now as well, and we're delighted to be so. I've done my hair especially for the whole thing. And I know that Kevin's turned up wearing a Spain replica Adidas, 1990s style retro tracksuit top. I like that.
Early 2000s. I'm not quite that old. So early 2000s. And this hair is a choice, Sam. I could grow it longer, but this is a choice.
Oh, right. And it looks great, by the way.
Thank you.
Darren Lewis couldn't grow it any longer, but he has turned up looking like Diego Simeone with his rather cool black shirt on. You right?
I'm not too bad, thanks. You're right. I couldn't grow it, but to be fair, I'm quite proud to be bald.
Yeah. Well, listen, we've all got to embrace everything that we've got. Darren, where have you been this weekend?
I've been at Chelsea, watching them struggle to get past an understrength West Ham side. They're obviously preparing for their Europa League semi-final against Eintracht Frankfurt on Thursday night, but they were really good competitors against the Chelsea side, expected to wipe them out. A really dramatic game and a fascinating afternoon at Stamford Bridge.
Absolutely. We'll get to that in just a second. It was certainly fascinating for 6 minutes towards the end. Kevin, what was the highlight of the weekend for you?
I think Divock Origi's goal for Liverpool, because it's just remarkable how often he's able to contribute in these massive games, even though in the grand scheme of things, he barely plays any football over the course of the season. And for somebody to A, accept the role that he takes on, but B, be able to fulfill it in the way that he does is really quite remarkable.
God, I was in the middle of a Liverpool loving between you two. I'm in a red sandwich tonight, aren't I? My highlight of the weekend was standing in the tunnel at the Emirates Stadium after Arsenal's victory over Manchester United and listening secretly to Scott McTominay. He was giving an interview in a different room, but it was just behind a curtain. So the room didn't have a proper partition. So it was just behind a curtain. You know what it's like? When you want to swear, you've had a bad day and you want to swear and you're trying to explain to someone that you're not happy about something. So what do? You say, well, excuse my French, but, and then you do the swearing, right? Is that true? Is that how it works?
Yes, that's fair.
Okay. Well, Scott McTominay got it the wrong way round. He was doing his interview and he just started effing and jeffing and then went to the interviewer, if you don't mind me swearing. No, Scott, that's the wrong way round, fella. You're supposed to warn them first before you do it, just in case they don't want you to. But anyway, it's no surprise that United got something back to front. We'll talk about them a little bit later on. But first, the Toffees are in a sticky patch. Let's start with a Merseyside derby and defeat for Everton, 2-0 to Liverpool. It means for the first time since August to November, 1948, yes, 1948, Everton have lost 8 consecutive away matches in all competitions. And the story was here because of what else happened on Sunday, notably Burnley winning their home match against Wolverhampton Wanderers. Is Everton, because of this, in serious danger of relegation after 68 straight seasons in the top flight, Darren?
Yes, in a word, I think they were spirited for an hour, but they can't stop conceding goals. They don't score enough goals. And I think morale at the club is very low. Lots of us have been doing all through this season, looking at fixtures and seeing what they could win, what they might not win. And we've all seen enough football not to play this game on paper, because you never, particularly at this stage of the season, know where the points are going to come from. But the facts are that when you look at the Everton team, there is not enough organisation in that back line. They could squeak games 1-0 if they were organised. They could squeak games 1-0 if there was a little bit of know-how about that side. But at the moment, they're too loose, they're too shambolic, and I think they'll go down.
I thought it was fractious, it was naughty, it was dirty, it was spicy, it was at times malevolent, but at least it was competitive. And I must admit, before the game, I didn't think it was going to be competitive. Jamie Carragher afterwards ripping into Everton, scathing. He said the Everton players have been cheating their manager and their fans all season. To put in a performance as good as that against one of the best teams in the world at the moment, at one of the hardest places to play football, they made it so difficult for Liverpool. They had a real fight today. They need to look at themselves, because this was nowhere near what they do on a week-to-week basis. Was there enough in that performance, Kevin, do you think, to give Everton fans hope that they can compete to the end of the season? Or will they do what they usually do, revert back to type next week?
I think that's the key, Sam. I think if they can maintain that kind of performance, that kind of solidity, then maybe they're in with the shot. I thought they were very well organised for the first hour. Liverpool had to make changes, and it shows again the depth of quality that Liverpool have at their disposal. I thought they were a threat on the counter. Thought when he wasn't going to ground too easily, Anthony Gordon played very well. I thought he caused a real problem for Trent Alexander-Arnold, and I was a little surprised that he didn't continue to make that impact, and he got switched at one stage that didn't really help. But I thought they played really well for that hour. But Liverpool's pressure is always going to break you in the end. And maybe when chances came along, they could have taken them a bit more clinically. But in general, as long as they can play with that heart and that desire, they can certainly take something from it.
Now, you know me. I want Frank Lampard to succeed. I'm desperate for Frank Lampard to succeed. I was going through the stats prior to the game. And ahead of his first game in charge in the Premier League against Newcastle on February the 8th, Everton was 16th in the Premier League. They're 4 points above the relegation places, with games in hand in all of the sides around them, barring bottom place Burnley at the time. They're currently 18th. They're 2 points behind Burnley with one game in hand. Their goals per game are lower. Their shots are lower. Their XG is lower. Their touches in the opposition box are lower. They run more, they tackle better, they have more of the ball, but they're still losing. Now, what can be done? How much responsibility can he bear? Because he hasn't got any luck either, has he? Mina doesn't play again today. Godfrey's injured in the warm-up. They have to make a late change. All those plans that they've been working on over the course of the last 48, 56 hours go out of the window because someone gets injured just prior to kickoff. How much is it down to him, and how much is it a wider malaise in the football club that has caused this problem?
I don't think it's down to Frank Lampard. I think that Everton right now are reaping the whirlwind. They are a club that thought that they could play to the gallery with celebrity signings, but there was no real cohesion or strategy about their recruitment policy. I think they've got a lot of players who individually are half decent, but as a team are not committed to what the club want to do. If you compare their resources with some clubs far higher up the table, they don't have as many, but there is a lack of heart within the side. And I take on board what you were saying, Kevin, about there was an organisation about Everton for an hour today, but that's the problem. There is organisation about the side for, say, one half, or for 80 minutes, or for 58 minutes, as there was when they played West Ham. Then they concede. There is always a lapse in concentration in every game that West Ham play. And they were lucky to get the points against Man United because they've down tools on their manager. But all the other games that they've played, they've been found wanting at the back. And I think it's about personal responsibility for individual players at that football club. I don't necessarily believe that you can lay that blame at Frank Lampard's door, because he can set them up, he can get them focused, he can give them a plan, but if they don't follow that plan, how can you blame him for that?
But going back over the course of the season, though, 17 Premier League games in a row away from home, Kevin, without keeping a clean sheet. But there was so much in that performance that Frank Lampard could take from it. And bearing in mind, they were dealing with the pressure of the Burnley result just prior to it. I mean, it's going to work one or two ways, isn't it? It's either going to be so dispirited, we conceded a goal in the end after literally defending for our lives for an hour. And that's going to have a dispiriting effect, and it's going to make them cascade into trouble. Or it's going to galvanise them. They think, well, we can compete with Liverpool here. So if we can compete with Liverpool, we can compete with anyone.
But you compete with Liverpool if you take a point or you win. You don't compete with Liverpool if you play half decent for an hour and then concede 2 goals. Where are they going to take these positives? They've got 6 games left. All of those games are going to be tough for them if they can't get organised and if they continue to give opposition team chances. That's why I'm so pessimistic about them. Mike Jackson's had a short spell in time in charge of Burnley. They've bought immediately into what he's trying to do because there are good players there. There are committed players there. I look at the Everton side, there are some committed players, but there are lots of players there, let's not kid ourselves, who went there for the money. And when it now comes down to showing the heart to save the club, half that team can do it, but the other half, I'm not so sure.
I think this is big for Frank Lampard, though, because I think he did an adequate job at Chelsea, but not a sensational job. I think, people made out that the transfer ban was some incredible handicap. He had amazing players at his disposal. And yes, he brought through some of the youngsters. Great. But they qualified for the Champions League, not particularly impressively. And I think you just got the feeling that defensively, he couldn't set the team up. And they're having similar problems now with him at Everton. And I do think if he's going to convince people in football that he is a credible coach at the top level in the long term, he has to find a solution to this, because if he is the coach that takes Everton down, that's a stain on his reputation that will stay for a long time. So this is as big for him, if not bigger, than that squad of players.
And I know, if he ends up taking Everton down, he never recovers from that. No one ever will, because ultimately, the first coach in over half a century to take Everton into the second tier, that stigma is not going to be shaken off very easily at all. And I don't want that to happen to him. This is a guy who actually, I know you say did an adequate job at Chelsea, but actually in the circumstances, I thought he did quite a good job. And Chelsea are reaping the benefits of some of those youngsters' experiences under Frank Lampard now, I think. And remember, 6 months, less than 6 months, 4 months after he left the club, they won the Champions League in Porto against Manchester City. So it wasn't all bad under Frank Lampard, and certainly needs a little bit of credit. You mentioned, we've got to mention Liverpool, and we'll say well done to them, because again, they've got the job done, and it's just a victory for squad game, isn't it? And the intelligence of the manager to make the change at the right time. Everton were giving them a problem. They switched it up. They changed it. The players that came on made an impact. And obviously they got themselves into a situation where all 3 points were secured. They're going toe to toe with Manchester City. Obviously, that is a big story. We will talk about Manchester City a little bit later on. Let's move to that Burnley game then, right? Because I think there's many people who sat there and thought, Sean Dyche, sack him. That's a good idea. Everybody, bearing in mind that Burnley seemingly had zero plan in place to replace him, not even in appointing a proper interim manager. They just promoted the under-23 coaches to just take it for a couple of days. Maybe they've stumbled upon something under Michael Jackson, because they have looked more front-footed, they've looked more aggressive, more assertive, and looked like the handbrake has been released. Was that all that needed to be done after all? Listen, the game against Wolves, you could tell after 10 minutes they were going to win. They weren't brilliant. They're not a brilliant team, but they wanted it more. Darren.
Yeah, they did appear to want it more. That's now 7 points they've taken from 3 games under Mike Jackson, and they seem to be playing with a bit more freedom, it has to be said. Listen, I still am not going to take these 7 points as a way of maybe playing down the job that Dyche did, because he kept them safe. And when you don't have a lot of resources, you do whatever you can. And he did. And he kept them competitive. He kept them in the Premier League. Football is a very ruthless industry. All of us know this, and everyone listening to this knows that. You can be the big cheese 1 minute, somebody comes in, replaces you, builds on your work, and suddenly everyone forgets what you did, and they start to go with the new guy in town. But I think that the job that Dyche did has laid the foundations for what Mike Jackson's doing right now. And I have to say, well, listen, it's not rocket science at all. The momentum now appears to be with Burnley.
Yeah, and I think the fixtures have fallen in a nice way for them. I think to get Southampton and then to get Wolves, teams that, I mean, certainly Wolves now certainly look on the fringes of Europe, if not out of it entirely. So I think that has helped. And sometimes it's just a new voice. And I don't think hailing what Mike Jackson has done, or Michael Jackson, depending on which way you go, hailing what he's done doesn't take anything away from Sean Dyche. That was a decade of excellence from him, the way that he's established that football club at Premier League level. There wasn't enough investment in the squad. I think that's plain to see. And he worked wonders. But especially when you've got a coach that's quite defensive, I think sometimes a new voice with a slightly new way of doing things can give players a short-term boost. The key now is, can they take that momentum through to the end of the season? Because that's what they're going to have to do if they're going to stay up.
Just when Manchester United thought it couldn't get any worse for Ralf Rangnick, they started this game with a series of errors that led to them being 2-0 down within half an hour. In truth, there was a lot in this game in which they were in charge for most of, actually. You know, they were on top. They were probably the most dominant force between the second Arsenal goal going in and Arsenal getting a third. But the game hinged on one moment. Bruno Fernandes electing to take a penalty ahead of Cristiano Ronaldo. What are you doing?
Fernandes, when he came to United, he was outstanding, as we all know, for a year and a half. That's kind of melted away into some really ridiculous performances from him. And he is a player crying out for somebody to get hold of him and get him back to the player he used to be. I'm not going to sit here and say that he's a bad player or that he's dragging United down, but I think we could all see that when Rangnick took him off, he was saving him from himself, because there was silly Hollywood balls, there was petulance, it was just a really immature performance from a player who is capable of far, far more. And I think his slump right now is symbolic of the general malaise at United. He's been sucked into that, but there is a really good player there, and hopefully the new manager will be able to get that out of him.
The whole club is in a funk that somebody needs to drag them out of. It's not an easy task, is it? I mean, if you were Eric Ten Hag's agent, I mean, apart from the fact that he's getting paid very, very well to do it, there's not much upside, is there?
I think there is. I think there's the opportunity to work out one of the world's biggest football clubs. The problem he's got is that he will only be able to do so much unless the rest of it is sorted out. And I think Ralf Rangnick, if he's done anything at the football club, is that he's shone a light on the real problems there. Because Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, whether you liked him as a coach, disliked him as a coach, thought he was any good, he was effectively a guy who was relentlessly positive about the club itself. Rangnick is much more realistic. And I think it's interesting that he's talked about attitude. He's talked about structure. He's talked about a club that needs open heart surgery and not just a few tweaks here and there. And he's effectively saying, look, these players are not working hard enough. They're not willing to work hand in hand with a coach. I mean, you can see that with the fact that Rangnick's way of playing has not been implemented at all. I mean, it's the polar opposite. He wants to win the ball back quickly, and he wants to attack with pace, and he wants to play this kind of vertical, fast-paced style. We've seen none of that. And one of the main reasons is the players are either unable to assimilate the information that he's giving them or unwilling to do that.
David Walsh wrote this brilliant column in the Sunday Times at the weekend in which he said, you know, Rangnick says this anecdote about Manchester United needing open heart surgery. Actually, the biggest surprise of all would be if the surgeon opened them up and found a heart, because they don't appear to have any. I mean, there's a lot of work to be done in the recruitment department. I was looking at some of the contracts that are coming to an end, people who may well move on. Pogba obviously is going now. Lingard's got to go. Cavani's got to go. Mata's got to go. Phil Jones has got to be moved on. He should have gone 2 or 3 transfer windows ago. Dean Henderson has probably got to go for his own good now. Eric Bailly has got to go. Martial, surplus to requirements. Van der Beek already out on loan. Brandon Williams already out on loan. Then there's Rashford. How do you solve that problem? Ronaldo, do you keep him for another year? The recruitment department has got to do so much, but it's got to be better than it has been recently. when you think that they've spent £180 million on centre-backs and they're still this bad, Darren?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's been said many times that United are almost a Frankenstein hybrid of different managers' philosophies. And when you look at the squad, you can see that. But you're right in saying that there are lots of players at the club who also have been hiding, players who could have gone out and had first team football elsewhere, had to do a bit of work. But it's an easy gig at United. You're in a good fat contract, you sit it out, even though you play a handful of games every season. And I think Ten Hag has to do what Conte did when he went to Spurs. Draw up a list of players that he wants to keep. The rest, get rid of them. The fascinating thing about me is the players that have allowed their contracts to run down, because if you're at one of the biggest clubs in the world, surely you do whatever you can to force your way into the thinking of the man in charge. And if you can't get that, then you demand to leave, because you have your personal pride as a footballer that you want to go elsewhere and play. I think the biggest problem at United right now, for me, is that they took the easy option in getting Rangnick instead of making a change last year. Well, when Solskjaer was sacked, they could have got a Conte. I still, to this day, refuse to believe the myth that Conte was too combustible. There are specific reasons, I'm sure, Kevin, you will be able to outline them as well, why he left his other clubs. I think there were people at United who didn't want the spotlight
scared of him.
to
They
be
didn't
shown
want
on
him.
them.
They're scared
Absolutely.
of him. That's the truth.
Absolutely.
And we said it to you at the beginning, right at the very time that this was all in the rumor mill, and everyone was talking about it's an obvious choice for him to replace Solskjaer, get Conte in. The reason they were never going to do it is because he would demand, he would force, he would push, he would make them see the problems. He would force them into spending money where they don't want to spend money.
Yep.
He would make them make decisions they don't want to make. Get rid of this guy, get rid of that guy. They're even making it difficult for Erik Ten Hag to bring some of his staff with him. He wants to bring McLaren and another guy, Van Gaag, in as an assistant. They made that process difficult. They want to keep some of the existing medical staff when he wants to bring his own. There's so much that needs to be worked out.
And Sam, this is the thing.
People will tell you, no, that's not the case. We're making it very easy for him. We're bringing him, and there'll be people that ring me up and tell me, oh no, that information's not right or whatever. But there's clearly no defined, almost like nod to this guy and do what you want, because if they were going to put their faith in someone who's absolutely elite, it wouldn't be Erik Ten Hag, because he's never proved that. It would be Antonio Conte, but they can't do that because then they'd have to relinquish so much control. And then
think about the Rangnick situation. The Rangnick situation sums up the muddled thinking at the football club. You've got a guy there that is a project guy and has been largely a football administrator. Yeah. So here's a guy that took Hoffenheim up the leagues, took them into the Bundesliga. I know that's a smaller scale, but he still showed that he could do it. With Red Bull, he did even more. It wasn't just about Leipzig. He set a template for an entire group of clubs. This is how we're going to do nutrition. This is how we're going to do recruitment. This is how we're going to have the facilities. They have the opportunity to truly tap into all of that knowledge and all of that experience. Instead, they did this weird bodge job of getting him in as coach. He admits himself, he was barely involved in Ten Hag's recruitment, and they wanted him to concentrate on coaching the club. Why? Why did they keep him out of that? Why did they bring him in anyway? They had this weird consultancy deal that we still don't know what that's really about, and he doesn't. That's going to go to the wayside.
That's not going to happen, I'm afraid.
It's utterly ridiculous, and they're in danger, Sam, of becoming the English Paris Saint-Germain, because you have players there who have too much power, and there's. What is coming is a really important moment for that football club when Ten Hag says to the people who run the club, I want to get rid of X, Y, Z. And the players need to have the knowledge that if I say they go, they go. If he loses that battle in the way that Unai Emery lost it at PSG, then we really know who has the power at that football club. And I think they're doomed to the same cycle as Paris Saint-Germain, except Paris win things and United won't. Just on that Jorginho penalty, he's missed a few big ones now. I mean, you think about Italy not qualifying for the World Cup. I mean, that was down, to a lot of things, but one of the big factors was a couple of big penalties that he failed at from the spot. It was a dreadful penalty against West Ham, missed one against England, of course, in that European Championship final. So I think he's going to have to maybe review his technique. That hop, step and the jump isn't really working in the way that it was. But it was a strangely flat game.
It's time to outlaw these stupid hop, skip and side foot penalty efforts, which are goalkeeper dependent. They know about them now. It isn't a secret. They watch videos of you. They research you. They've seen your last 20 penalties. They know you missed 2 crucial penalties against Switzerland and it cost you a place at the World Cup. They know you missed one in the European Championship final. They are going to psych you out. Fabianski is going to walk up to you just beforehand and go, I've seen you do this thousands of times. I know what your plan is. Clearly, Jorginho realizes this just before he hits the ball. The panic on his face as Fabianski stares him down and decides, actually, I ain't going anywhere, fella. So where are you going to put it now? And then surprise, shock, only a half tap of the ball and it dribbles into his arms. I mean, for God's sakes, the technique is done. Get rid of it. It can only ever be a surprise technique anyway. And the idea of developing it as your technique was always a bad idea because you can never do it for a long period of time because it's very easy to read once you know what the plan is. And once people know, just stand there and wait for them to kick it, there's nowhere to go.
Well, think about Lewandowski, Sam. Think about the way Lewandowski takes his. He does a shuffle. It's not a jump. He does a little shuffle, but he doesn't have to smack the ball when he hits it. And that's the difference because even if you're going to do a shuffle like that, you have to hit the ball hard. Because then you take the goalkeeper out of it. If you do your shuffle, and even if the goalkeeper goes the right way, if you still smacked it into the corner, then you're fine. But if you're going to hit it at pretty low pace once you've done the jump, then you're in big trouble if the goalkeeper gets it right.